On Tuesday, and in the first hours after this crisis, the pictures told the story. The nation was stunned. They are still surprising to see, even though they've been repeated in some cases hundreds of times. Now, these days, however, it is the voices, the witnesses, the survivors who lived through all of this and may never recover from any of it. Here with their story, Dateline NBC correspondent Victoria Corderi.
New Yorkers woke to realize they were still living the astonishing nightmare.
You want to go down there and dig out through the rubble, but you don't know what to do. You don't know where, you feel so helpless because there's nothing in your power that you can physically do.
In the aftermath of the terrorist attacks, there is an unsettling quiet on the streets and an air of perseverance from people looking for loved ones.
Any information that you have, just to their whereabouts, their last whereabouts.
To legions of rescue workers seeking any sign of survival.
Civilians in there, volunteers, a lot of people helping. Everybody's doing their part.
Supposedly one of our guys is still alive down there, and they're trying to get him out.
Some who lived through those moments of what seemed like Armageddon fought to control their emotions.
I was on the 24th floor, and the first plane hit, and the building rocked to the right and back. And I opened the door of the conference room, and I saw the plane go by and people falling.
Jimmy Vasquenza works for Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield in what was the second tower of the World Trade Center. He fled to the stairs with his co-workers until they reached the vicinity of the 16th floor.
You know, there was just a traffic jam for people trying to get down.
But then, saviors.
Firemen started coming through, and they let us down. Company 22 in New York City, freaking heroes. Not one of them had fear in their eye.
Jimmy pressed on to reach the street.
We got down to the bottom in the plaza. There was bodies everywhere. They were all on fire and broken. It was just the most horrific thing you've ever seen in your life.
So many on the ground saw unthinkable images.
It looked like a bomb had gone off.
Harry Crosby was on his way to work when the planes hit the World Trade Center. He says what he saw was a life-changing experience.
People were jumping in pairs and threes, in groups. It was devastating. People weren't jumping for safety. I think they were jumping because they had two choices: to stay and endure probably a harsher end, or take a leap. I'm sure they had no choice, and they jumped.
Wendy Silva was evacuating when the second plane hit her building, the impact throwing her to the ground.
I knew at that point that I probably wasn't going to live, is what I thought, and I kept thinking, I'm not ready to die. I don't want to die right now. We walked as quickly as we could down the stairs, and I remember just counting the floors and knowing that each floor I was closer to living.
I thought the building was going over. The building starts to rock, smoke starts come billowing up, and that's when just sheer terror.
Dan Hoff also was crammed into a stairwell trying to get out, not realizing until he hit the street that his fate might have been much different.
If they had hit the World Trade Center 2 first, I would have been evaporated. I'd be dead. And I'm here now because of that 18 minutes that the time difference bought me. I mean, you never realize how fragile life is until you can measure it in minutes.
So many survivors are wondering how it was they were spared, whether by minutes or movement or sheer happenstance. One of the most incredible stories we learned of is that of Patrick Andre, who works for an investment banking firm.
I'm standing holding the door, and then suddenly there's a huge explosion.
He was on the 71st floor of the North Tower when he heard the explosion hit the South Tower. Patrick lived through the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, so he wasted no time in herding all of his co-workers to the exit. His hand was on the door when the second plane tore through the windows on his floor, shearing the building in half.
Flames coming to my left, smoke both sides, my left and the right, and my right side, and the ceiling caving in.
Perhaps because Patrick was already at the exit, he was able to escape the colliding plane that passed right by him. Meanwhile, Patrick's wife, Michelle, working in uptown Manhattan, was frantic.
When I heard from one parent that the number 2 building had been hit and that it had collapsed and everyone was dead, At that point, I started crying.
Patrick Andre made it to daylight when so many others did not. But after surviving 2 brushes with terrorism, he says he's not going back to a building that size again.
2 times is enough. I don't think I need to have a 3rd time.
Part of the agony that continues to plague so many is the not knowing. Who survived? Who did this? Why? But those are greater questions to be answered in time. For now, there are only small blessings for people like Jimmy Vescenza, who finally was able to make it out of the war zone that is Lower Manhattan and back to the loving embrace of family.
Everybody was lined up trying to hitchhike out of the tunnel. It was like, and this guy pulled up in a pickup truck and drove me all the way to the ferry, and I got home. And I'm home now.
Victoria Corderi with that story of different people's stories having survived this attack on the World Trade Center.